And that's sometimes what we might see earliest whenever it comes to the symptoms of schizophrenia. Even prior to the diagnosis, individuals usually get diagnosed late teens, early 20s. But
Mhm.
even before that, you might notice this decline in functioning. And what we've actually identified, the first 3 to 5 years after a diagnosis are what we call the critical period, because this seems to be when the condition progresses most rapidly. So I always say these are the individuals that we want to intervene quickly before we let that progression happen.
Hey, this is Jonathan Marks from GoToHealthMedia.com. Welcome back to another show. Our mission is twofold. First, to bring evidence-based health information to the public, and second, to promote the work and expertise of health experts with multimedia campaigns. Subscribe to our show at GoToHealthMedia.com so you don't miss an episode. And you can catch us also on YouTube and 8 podcast networks. So on to today's show. Schizophrenia is a severe mental health disorder that affects people's thoughts, emotions, and actions. It can result in symptoms including hallucinations, delusions, and disruptive behavior. Managing schizophrenia symptoms in the first 3 to 5 years after diagnosis, which some doctors call the critical period, is crucial for a patient's treatment. It also helps delay the time to relapse, as repeated relapses can worsen long-term outcomes. Few people grasp the effects of schizophrenia as deeply as Katie Hayes, who is with us today. As a registered nurse and a caregiver to her adult son who lives with schizophrenia, Katie understands the personal and medical impacts of the disease. Like many caregivers, Katie says it took patience to find the right treatment plan, but now her son can make decisions independently again. He graduated from law school and is preparing for the bar exam. Even more importantly, she says they have an emotional connection once more. Also with us is Brooke Kempf, a psychiatric nurse practitioner. She's been in a community mental health center and has been a trailblazer as she developed medication monitoring services and treatment clinics for individuals with serious mental illness and excelled at providing nursing services to group home residents. Ms. Kempf obtained her master's degree from the State University at Stony Brook of New York and is board certified by the American Nurses Credentialing Center as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. If you want to learn more about schizophrenia, we encourage you to visit the website treatyourschizophrenia.com. That's treatyourschizophrenia.com. So, welcome to the show, Katie Hayes and Brooke Kempf. How are you today?
We're good. Thanks for having us.
Good. So, Brooke, can you explain what schizophrenia is and the symptoms that are associated with the disease, especially the early symptoms and how people can recognize that it's coming on?
Absolutely. Actually, that's why Katie and I are excited to be here today and partner with Johnson & Johnson so that we can educate others about schizophrenia and what treatment options are out there. So
Good.
first and foremost, schizophrenia, it's complex. It is a medical diagnosis. It affects about 2.8 million individuals just within the United States.
Oh,
And its symptoms consist of some different things. First, we call positive symptoms. So anything that adds to a patient's baseline. So hearing things, seeing things that aren't there, paranoia. Then we have negative symptoms. So symptoms that take away from a patient's baseline level of functioning. Loss of motivation, loss of communication skills. But then it also affects individuals cognitively. So their thought process becomes a little bit more disorganized. And that's sometimes what we might see earliest whenever it comes to the symptoms of schizophrenia. We have a prodromal stage. Even prior to the diagnosis, individuals usually get diagnosed late teens, early 20s. But
mhm.
even before that, you might notice this decline in functioning. And what we've actually identified, the first 3 to 5 years after a diagnosis are what we call the critical period, because this seems to be when the condition progresses most rapidly. So I always say these are the individuals that we want to intervene quickly before we let that progression allow to happen. that will only impact patients' outcomes negatively. So, in order to have positive patient outcomes, we've been utilizing things like long-acting injectables. These are actually injections that patients can take once a month, once every 3 months, once every 6 months, actually, they have
Mhm.
available now, so that an individual does not have to take a pill every single day. And we actually have data for Invega Sustenna, a Johnson and Johnson long-acting injectable for individuals within this critical period that shows that Invega Sustenna delays the time to relapse longer than common oral antipsychotics.
And is this something that people can either grow out of or get, resolved in some way, or is this a lifelong diagnosis?
This is a chronic lifelong diagnosis. The individuals will carry the diagnosis. However, it can be managed with the appropriate treatment.
Got it. Katie, can you please share with us your experience of caring for your son with schizophrenia and how he's doing today?
Absolutely, Jonathan. In the beginning, when my son's psychotic symptoms began, and with his first psychotic break, it was like living in a nightmare. Nowhere to turn, nobody to talk to who could relate what was going on, or having a child with schizophrenia or who was experiencing psychosis. The fear and anxiety was
Sure.
paralytic at times. There was a lot of self-blame. Was this something that I could have prevented? Was it drugs and alcohol that caused this? One of the most important things that I learned early on, and how to, me being a nurse as well, I'm trying to navigate my way out of the nightmare. How can we wake up from this? Was to educate myself about schizophrenia and its symptoms and what other people had written about it or spoke about, what it is that they were experiencing. And one of the things that I learned was one of the biggest barriers is they don't realize they're sick. They
Hmm.
lack insight into their illness. So, upon discharge from most hospitalizations, you get an oral medication. Sometimes you get three, five oral medications. So, if you don't think you're sick, why would you take this medication? And that's where they usually fall through the cracks there, is they stop taking their medication, and then these symptoms, like Brooke was talking about, reoccur, trying to stop that in that critical 3 to 5 year period. So one of the next things I looked for is, it was a very lonely, this is a lonely journey for caregivers. So I reached out to NAMI, and eventually, when we got into a coordinated specialty care, which dealt with first episode psychosis, there were support groups for caregivers. And it was there that I actually learned about another caregiver's son who was on a long-acting injectable, Invega Sustenna, by Johnson and Johnson, and just listened to how well he was doing and how productive his life had become after taking the injection. Again, I want to clarify to here that it is very important that you talk to your healthcare professional about a long acting or any treatment that you may think would be suitable for your loved one, because what works for one may not work for another. And my son today has been in remission for 10 years,
Hmm.
has a professional career, is living independently, and him and as well as anybody living with schizophrenia is a hero.
That's wonderful. That's such great news. I'm so glad to hear that about your son. Katie, tell me more at the beginning. You're a registered nurse, and yet you
Mhm.
still felt so alone and isolated. What would you recommend
Oh
for
gosh,
parents who start, recognizing these kinds of symptoms in their child? What
yeah.
do they do? Where do they go for help?
Well, absolutely. And there are people, I just want everybody to know, there's people like me, caregivers who are active in the support groups and are there to share their stories. What I found most empowering in my recovery, what I also learned was, and I want to clarify too, Jonathan, that recovery has no endpoint. My son and I are in continuous recovery. He knows he has schizophrenia, that it's not going to go away, that he has to continue his treatment.
Hmm.
And again, just sharing your story fills that void of loneliness. And again, and even in the medical profession and with the people I worked with, it was a very difficult thing for them to grasp, because again, it's easy to go to the stigmatized versions of schizophrenia, of it's drugs, it's alcohol, they're not smart, they
Right.
just don't have the ability to go to college, things like that. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I'm sure you mentioned earlier that there's self-blame. What did I do wrong? What did I miss?
Yeah,
But this
yeah.
is really not it's really not your fault. This is something that's
No.
happening. Yeah. So, Brooke, do we know what brings schizophrenia on? Is it genetic? Is it environmental? What starts it? And how do we know?
It's a very good question. And there's still a lot of questions behind that. We don't know 100% for sure, but we do know it's often a combination of environment, genetics, and a multitude of different factors as far as when it comes to the environment and patient's history. And again, why we want to intervene early so that we can prevent the progression of this illness over time. If we intervene early, you have to catch those symptoms early. You look at family history often because that will kind of give an idea in that line of genetics, but then also talking with your healthcare provider so that you can identify if these symptoms might line up. Nothing is 100%. There are some individuals in very good environments and no genetic history that still end up with the illness itself. So it's questionable, but there are some moderate links in there.
Right. And Brooke, why is it important to catch this early? Does it get worse over time if it's untreated, or if you treat it early, can you mitigate the
It
symptoms?
It can get worse if you do not treat early. What we see happen over time, every time an individual relapses or symptoms return, the brain is not supposed to be sick, and it actually does physical damage to the brain whenever these relapses occur. So if you think about an individual who's going to deal with this chronic illness over decades, we want to prevent those relapses from occurring. If they're getting this in their late teens, early 20s, and they're allowed to continue to have multiple relapses, we don't know the individual that is present 3, 4 decades later may be different. If we intervene early and we prevent and delay those times to relapse, that's less damage that is going to occur over all of these decades.
Great. And we're talking about damage to the brain. I mean, the more episodes they have, it really causes damage to the brain.
Damages brain tissue.
Katie, what was it like finding the right treatment for your son?
Well, one of the first things that I noticed was things started quieting down in his head. He was able to organize himself. I wasn't organizing for him. A lot of cognitive function returned.
Hmm.
He was trying to set goals, and financially too, starting to set those financial goals and was able to meet them.
So, in terms of getting treatment for him, what was your process? Did you first go to your general practitioner or his pediatrician, however old he was?
Unfortunately, in most cases, and Brooke can give her opinion on this as well, but most times you get the diagnosis of schizophrenia after they've already had a psychotic break or they're going into a psychotic break, and you have to admit them to the hospital.
Hmm. That's difficult.
So it becomes very difficult. The road that was really hard to navigate for us was from the hospital out into the regular, because they refer you into these programs. And that's why I encourage a lot of caregivers to look into programs that refer you to and see in your area if there is a coordinated specialty care or some team like Brooke is a part of that focuses on first episode psychosis, because those first 3 to 5 years are very important, and it's more than just medication management that they
Hmm.
need. It's employment. They're going to need some guidance. Some of them want to return to school. They have an employment, an education specialist, a therapist, and a psychiatrist. The nurse who's giving the medication is actually very important.
So, Katie just referred to the kind of treatment center that you've worked at before, Brooke. Can you tell us what kind of services are there and what people should look for as they evaluate treatment for their child?
Absolutely. I was blessed to actually step into work right after school in our community mental health center, and I actually spent 29 years there. That doesn't always happen in our nursing career, but the reason why I stayed there so long was the complex services that a community mental health center can offer to patients with schizophrenia. So they offer a multitude of services like counseling services, employment services, medication management. They administer these long-acting injectables. You can be set up with prescribers to talk with them about appropriate treatment options. They do have inpatient settings also, so that if you are in a crisis, you have a relapse of these symptoms, and you need to be hospitalized, you can go into a safe environment until you are stabilized. Then we can discharge you back into our outpatient community where we can wrap you with these outpatient services. But as Katie mentioned, we want to avoid those hospitalizations because no matter how good a center or an inpatient unit is, being hospitalized for a patient with schizophrenia can be a very traumatic event. It's
Mm,
not like other hospitalizations. You don't have a lot of visitors showing up with balloons and flowers and candy and get well cards.
mm.
It's often, if you think about the symptoms that they're dealing with at the time, the paranoia, the distortions of reality, that's not a happy time for an individual. So it's very imperative that we try and avoid those relapses from happening with medications like long-acting injectables. What happens with a long-acting injectable, not only does it help with adherence, none of us are very good at taking our medicine the way we're supposed to every single day. And
Hmm.
just missing your medication on occasion can cause a relapse of schizophrenia. So what a long-acting injectable can do is it provides you this period of time where you can get your injection once a month with Invega Sustenna, but they also have every 3 month option, and even an option where a patient with schizophrenia only has to take treatment by an injection twice a year. No
Wow.
taking daily oral medication. And so that's a wonderful thing for adherence, but it's also convenience. We don't want our patients thinking about schizophrenia and being sick. We want our patients to be working on other treatment goals with their treatment team. So it's imperative that they talk with their treatment team about the goals that they might have and see if an option like Invega Sustenna might benefit them.
Great. So I want to ask a final question to each of you, which is what's the message you'd like to leave people with before we end our interview today? But before I do, let me just tell people that you can learn more at treatyourschizophrenia.com. That's treatyourschizophrenia.com. And you can learn more, a lot more, about what these two folks are talking about if you feel you are in need. So let me ask Brooke. What's a final message you'd like to leave with people today?
My final message is we have to get rid of the stigma of schizophrenia. This is a medical diagnosis that the patient, the family, none of them caused this diagnosis. It's a medical diagnosis. These are real people with real feelings and can have a real future with appropriate treatment.
Great. And Katie, what's a message you'd like to leave people with?
Well, I'm going to quote my son. One of the first quotes here is silence only adds to the stigma. We need to talk about it. We need to share our stories. I found that sharing my story as a caregiver really filled the void of loneliness with hope and comfort. The second quote I have for my son is he said recently, he said, happiness does not find you. You need to go find your happiness.
Wow, that's brilliant. That's beautiful. He's doing well now. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Good. And so what kind of job does he have? He's living independently, you said?
Yeah, he's a professional.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Good. That's
Has a
so great.
professional career.
Good for you. Good for him. Thank you so much for being with us both today and educating us about this important topic. Brooke, you said how many people get schizophrenia?
In just the United States, our statistics show 2.8 million adults in the United States.
That's a lot of people. Thank you so much for sharing this information with us today. Remember, you can learn more at treatyourschizophrenia.com. We've been talking with Brooke Kempf. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and also Katie Hayes, a registered nurse and caregiver to her adult son who has schizophrenia, and he's living independently and happily now. Thanks both for being with us. So appreciate it.
Thank you for having us and bringing light to this topic.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Yes, good. So this has been Jonathan Marks with Go to Health Media. You can subscribe to us at gotohealthmedia.com. We've just passed 1.5 million downloads. Thank you so much for your loyalty and support. And remember, as we say at the end of every show, go to health. Take care. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in today to Go to Health. You are one of almost 10,000 people per day who enjoy the evidence-based health information offered by our guest health experts. You can watch us on our website and YouTube and listen to us on 8 podcast networks. Be sure to join Jonathan Marks in our upcoming shows each week. If you like our show, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. You can subscribe to the show, join our email list, send us feedback, browse through the online store, and view our library of over 150 shows at gotohealthmedia.com. See you next time, and remember to elevate your life with Go to Health.